For the newcomers, welcome. And for the people that already attended the first session, welcome again. I also have a small introduction prepared for this one. So in fact, I go back in time. So we are the 31st of January in 2020. So it was the start of last year. I'm in my hometown in Bruges, and we are all together for the midterm review meeting. While I am sweating in front of the midterm project jury, part of our team organizes our EURAKNOS vision paper. We do have major representatives of FAO, GODAN and AKIS, and they ask in-depth questions related to the sustainability of our work. And then we say, okay, we still have to do our policy brief, but in fact, at the same time, we ask ourselves the same questions. How can we serve farmers, foresters, and advisors across Europe in the long term well? What can we do for them? And in fact, there is no one fits for all solution. And sitting around the table in January, our vision paper is written. Today, we are the 5th of February 2021, and it's 1 year later. We have carefully followed the guidelines of our vision paper, and the central platform is there. It's there for all of us. So in fact, let us spread the word across Europe. Do not repeat this work. In fact, let us all make use of it. It is there to help each other. I'm very glad that I can give now the word to Laura, who will talk about our policy recommendations. Laura, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, so I'm Laura, and as Peter has just said, we're going to be talking about policy recommendations in this session. Throughout, please do comment in the chat with any feedback or thoughts or questions on anything that we suggest in this session. And throughout, I will be pausing for your responses to any of our recommendations, and I will be helped by that with Ilse and Milena will be monitoring the chat to help me to not lose track of anything that people want to feed back on. So, policy recommendations. So, to fulfill the aims of thematic networks, EURAKNOS proposes that improved digital exchange of best practices between farmers, researchers and advisors from different sectors and member states is needed. EURAKNOS has been working towards two main aims: to provide guidance to thematic networks on the best way to function and achieve high impact, as was shared in the first session about our Explorer's Guide, and also to develop a prototype for a centralised digital knowledge repository platform, which Lawrence will present about this afternoon. We started with a desktop study of concluded and current thematic networks that are ongoing, and did interviews with project coordinators to determine the best practices and challenges. Those ideas were further developed through workshops and working groups. And then based on those findings and discussions, we've now established some recommendations for changes to policy and funding structures, which can support the function of thematic networks, and also to create and maintain a centralized knowledge database. Thematic networks serve a range of different purposes for different audiences. So within policy and funding frameworks, thematic networks serve to promote engagement with end users and other actors and stakeholders to deliver maximum impact by encouraging and supporting the implementation of innovation and evidence-based practices on the ground. This is key to successfully meeting targets, for example, those included in the EU Green Deal, because if there's a gap between the knowledge and practice, it's not going to have much impact. And then thematic networks can be integral components of knowledge systems contributing to agricultural knowledge innovation systems, or AKIS, at different levels, regional, national and EU level, and can increase representation and involvement of end users and other multiple actors in these networks. Thematic networks also collect and share existing knowledge from other providers on what are practical good practices. And so they can provide a great resource for advisors and educators to use with their clients and students to offer the opportunity to spread the expertise to a wider audience. So they are key intermediaries for this advice. Ultimately, thematic networks aim to provide practical knowledge to those that can make use of it, farmers and foresters. To accomplish this requires two-way exchange to ensure that the funded work is providing attainable, valuable solutions to current relevant problems for the farming and forestry communities. Our policy recommendations are based around three main areas. So having worked together with those multiple actors involved in thematic networks, we have developed our policy brief. It outlines 6 key recommendations which relate to 3 key areas: digital systems, ensuring practical relevant outputs, and increasing reach and impact of dissemination and networking efforts. With regards to digital systems, EURAKNOS believes that providing thematic networks with a centralised platform to store and share their knowledge outputs is one way to help increase the effectiveness of thematic networks. It could become a well-known and trusted resource for all user groups. First, I'll talk through our vision paper, outlining what the platform could and should be and its potential value. And then I'll explain our policy recommendation related to digital systems. So, the vision. Our vision paper outlines what we want from a centralised database system, which is aimed to act as a repository for thematic network resources and as the go-to website for practical farming and forestry knowledge. Currently, every thematic network has its own website, which they start from scratch with zero name recognition and share their resources in different forms and formats using different structures. And when the funding runs out, the useful information stored on the website is likely to eventually be lost when the people involved can no longer sustain that website. We propose that having a centralized system which thematic networks can contribute to would offer a more permanent storage solution for storing and sharing resources. It could gain greater recognition in the farming and forestry communities compared to individual project websites. And funding could potentially be more effective if it is directed to a centralized platform rather than to developing individual project websites, which have to be complex and have this resource storage and search function involved to be really user-friendly. And they also, as I said, that they're not necessarily known about, so they also tend to attract relatively little web traffic. So a centralized place might help with that. The purpose of our vision paper was to establish our wish list for features and functionalities for a centralized platform. It was set in an ideal world situation. So at this point, we weren't discussing whether it was possible. We're looking at the functions we want it to have to be the best system it could be. So first of all, we outlined that to achieve high impact, the system must first attract thematic networks to want to disseminate their resources through the platform, and then in turn motivate end users to engage with the information on the platform. The system should function as a living structure, constantly being updated and enhanced according to user feedback and consultations. Fundamentally, users must be made aware of the platform, be attracted to try the platform, and experience the system positively. This means that they are then more likely to return and recommend the resource to others. Promotion by word of mouth requires users to perceive the platform to have instrumental and intrinsic value, improving their experiences of searching for and accessing agricultural and forestry knowledge, offering time-saving search functions and practically relevant, attainable solutions. The platform must be easy to find and access through personal recommendations or specific activities designed to promote the database, or by general visibility, for example, by being a top result for relevant search terms within existing search engines. The database should function on both web and mobile app platforms so that they can be accessed in the field or in the office. And within the platform, resources must be easy to find, offering an effective search function, filters, and allowing users to arrange their content in an easy-to-use structure based on a problem-solving framework. Users cannot search for solutions if they are unsure what the answer to their problem is. First-time users should be able to use all functions and navigate with great ease, requiring the platform to be available in local languages. For knowledge to be practical, it must be understood, so individual resources must also be translated. The platform will be available for use by anyone, but there should be an option to also register to create an individual profile, which allows the interface and its functionalities to be tailored and adapt to suit the user's needs and preferences. This function could also support a user feedback or rating systems and a community forum. The platform should also facilitate both virtual and physical interactions, meetings and exchanges by listing relevant events, activities, and registered users who consent to allowing others to contact them, in order to allow users with common areas of interest and expertise to connect and participate in exchanges and networking as part of an interactive community experience. Of course, this is the real world, so if anything that I've just mentioned seems a bit too good to be true at this point, you're right. Our blue sky thinking must consider some challenges. But by knowing our ideal aims, technology can be further developed towards achieving them, and people like Lawrence knows what to aim for in developing towards what we want. Firstly, this platform will require financing. It takes time, effort, and resources to achieve positive reputation and a large following. And there will be continuous costs related to the creation, maintenance, enhancements, and administration costs required to ensure a good level of quality control for the information on the platform. Secondly, translation is essential to ensure the platform is useful to users in all member states, regardless of their grasp of English or certain other European languages. Currently, automated translations are not very accurate, particularly for technical terms that might be included in these sorts of resources. But they could be improved using integrated user learning so that technology is able to improve grammatical errors, technical terms, based to when prompted by the user. It's anticipated that automated language translators will undergo vast improvements to become ever more accurate in the very near future. The platform is intended to be inclusive and pluralistic, but will also favour farmers and foresters who are more digitally skilled. So it may alienate those who are less digitally literate. Educators and advisors are key to reach those more analogue users. And information should be made readily available as training materials for further dissemination and exploitation through vocational schools, technical colleges, agricultural universities, as well as lifelong learning programs and other outreach efforts, again, making use of these key intermediaries. Ultimately, for this platform to become a reality, a sustainable funding scheme or business model is required. We propose that some central funding be diverted away from individual project websites into this centralised platform. Other avenues, such as allowing advertising, could be explored, but it must not detract from the positive user experience. But there's many benefits to be gained from overcoming those challenges. Firstly, the proposed platform could develop into a high-impact system, offering long-term sustainability to thematic network outcomes and resources. Having a ready-to-use system for sharing project outputs would reduce repeated efforts, particularly to develop that function on individual project websites, and would therefore be a more cost-effective use of funding. Having a centralised database also provides a single access point for practical farming and forestry knowledge. This makes it easier for practitioners to find project outputs without knowing the name of specific projects. Various thematic networks directing users to one website will result in higher traffic to the central platform than would otherwise be achieved. Having similar or complementary themes covered in one centralised platform could also serve to strengthen links between research, practice, and education. and makes it easier to monitor work that has been conducted, is currently running, and future needs. In this way, relationships, interconnections, and knowledge flows will be supported by the system and would complement ACIS strategies in member states. The future EU Common Agricultural Policy highlights the importance of digitalisation of agriculture and rural areas, something which a central knowledge platform could benefit. It could also contribute to United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, particularly those seeking to promote industry innovation and infrastructure and to end world hunger. This brings us to our first policy recommendations related to digital systems. Our first recommendation is that it's necessary to support our vision for a centralised knowledge platform for agriculture and forestry. As you said, we recommend that this is promoted and financed, at least in part, by public funding to begin with, at least. Second, funding should be allocated to increase the digital literacy skills of farming and forestry actors through training and support. This would enable those actors and users to access online information resources such as the centralised knowledge base we propose, and access online forums for other knowledge sharing and online peer-to-peer learning. So I'm going to pause here now for a little bit of interaction. So what do you think about our vision for this platform? What do you think about these two simple policy recommendations we've suggested to support digital systems? Ilse and Melaine, do we have any questions and comments from the chat?
Actually, there's been quite a long discussion in the chat, but I think it's not specifically about these two recommendations. And I think it's an important discussion that we should take up at the end of this. So please, if you have any specific questions to these two recommendations, you could either unmute your mic and say it now or write it in the chat and I will read it. Doesn't look like it. So, but okay. As I said, there will be a long discussion at the end, but I think we'll save it for the end.
Great. That's good to know that we've got something to talk about at the end. That's exciting for me because I'm not looking at the chat at the moment. Okay, so I will continue then. Our work has also indicated that there are other key principles for thematic networks to follow, as detailed in the Explorer's Guide. Activities which stimulate the multi-actor approach, facilitate a bottom-up knowledge exchange as opposed to linear top-down knowledge transfer, and which engages users and responds to their needs, are key to ensure project results are relevant and share valuable, ready-for-use innovations and practices. So these high-impact activities could also be better supported through revised policy and/or funding structures. And these are our recommendations to support practical output. It's essential that users are involved and engaged in projects from conceptualization throughout implementation. This can be difficult, and we propose that funding schemes should provide extra financial incentives for farmers and foresters to participate to prove tangible benefit to participation and offer reimbursement for labour costs associated with covering their time away from the field and forest. In addition, problems faced by farmers and foresters change, evolve, and adapt over time. They do not remain static and may shift from the issues identified at the conceptualization of the project. Funding frameworks should allow thematic networks to be more flexible, to respond to challenges that arise or develop over the course of the project in response to changes in social, economic, regulatory, and environmental conditions. So again, any comments or questions about these recommendations?
I can start by saying that after you picked up again, there are actually two comments for the previous recommendations. Someone says that these are great recommendations that the participant fully supports. And Meta says that the sustainability of the platform is important and resources for that are needed. Mm-hmm. So those two recommendations were, at least by these two participants, applauded and agreed upon. There are, as of this moment, no comments to these two recommendations, but maybe we should give it a little time. And if you do have a comment, please, you could unmute your microphone and say it directly, or you could write it in the chat. Here was one. These recommendations were also our recommendation when we had a cross-exchange event in Hungary, Aniko says. So that's good to know that it's not just on a top level, but also a local level that we have these same recommendations.
Yeah.
And again, important points. And another one, I think this is not a question of funding. In general, we need to improve farmers' adoption and farmers' knowledge. We have a large amount of material, but still it's low used and adopted by end users. Hardy, could you maybe open your microphone? Because I'm not sure what you mean by, can I argue with funding P3?
Yes, hello, Hardy Tam is my name. I guess the suggestion was that this funding schemes means automatically some kind of fee to farmer if that participates in meeting. I think this kind of linking is too much. But in some time, in some degree, the funding should be there. But if we just exaggerate a little bit, that may this funding is always there. That means that if you come to meeting, we will be paid for that. This is the value of this creation of solving something. Then will be lost. Then it's just earning the money if you participate in the meeting. That kind of argument.
Thank you, Hardy. Do you have any comments to that, Laura?
I think that we've kind of touched on this with the previous comment as well about the gap between we've got this knowledge and how do we educate farmers. As I mentioned previously, that's still kind of in the top-down knowledge transfer mindset as opposed to the knowledge exchange mindset. So in order to ensure that results are relevant to farmers, we need and foresters as well, we need to make sure that those target users are involved from the beginning. They have valuable knowledge, they have valuable insights, they know what their challenges are, what works for them, what won't work for them, and they can offer really good insights to actually ultimately speed up innovation at later stages. It might become a really long early process of iterations and going back and forth about what will and won't work. But it can be really difficult to engage farmers at that stage, particularly if there's nothing tangible yet. So by saying, if you take part in this workshop, say, and we can reimburse your time, it doesn't necessarily need to be a massive amount of money, but just something to reimburse them for their time and expertise. It might help to engage them. And in terms of, I think it can't just be we need to educate farmers more. It also needs to be taking a step back and looking at what the funding and advisory efforts that are happening, why aren't they being effective? It's not just saying that farmers aren't taking up this knowledge that's available. Something's going wrong with how we are providing knowledge. So those are the processes that we're trying to change.
There have been quite a few more comments while you have been talking, and I'll just try to catch on the ones that are mostly related to what you just talked about. Ben says that I agree with funding. The substantial evidence that farmers' uptake of best practice is linked with reductions of risk and ambiguity. Putting money into the program is vital to reducing those. And funding should be thought of in conjunction with the reset model of mindset change. And Jessica actually replies to Ben, I agree. That means the partners in the project are paid to join the meeting. Why shouldn't the farmers be? And they have a job to do back the farm, and not being there means it doesn't get done, or they have to get someone else to cover. Anniko also added that in Hungary, they find it challenging to involve the farmers because it means a long-term engagement in a rapidly changing economical environment. Yes, and Claire says that to increase adoption, you need to ensure to take the farmers foresters with you. Co-production is required. And Margarita agrees with Claire. Expect that to be tackled in other recommendations. Actually, someone says not sure funding is necessarily very essential. And then we come back to something that's quite different. So I don't know whether you want to pick up on that, or we should just say that there are quite some opinions about this. And it seems that our work is not quite finished, even though the project soon is. But Suzanne says that the Horizon 2020 funding is actually quite flexible. You just need to do amendments. The problem with amendments is the workload of the research and the REA, I'm not sure what the letters are for, and the financial officers but not the rules of the Horizon 2020. So that's an argument that maybe the funding schemes are more flexible than we have indicated in our recommendations. Yeah, I know the REA is the financing agency. Thank you, Meta. But maybe not everybody knew that, the European agency looking after all these projects. And Luke says farmers will bring their knowledge into discussions as well. So there is some mutual benefit. And someone says, we have completed 2 amendments. They took an average of 12 months each to get approval, which means that it may be possible, but it's not very flexible.
Absolutely. I think that's the point for the flexibility side of things. You are pinned into your grant agreement, and whilst amendments are possible, if it takes 12 months to make those, you might need to amend them again to make it even more relevant. So kind of built into the grant agreement itself of something like we propose that this is the area we're going to work on, but as that evolves, then we might adapt this response and report that through our midterm reporting and progress reports and technical reports and things like that. So yes, so it's that flexibility side of things.
Well, the comments keep popping up, so I'll just read the next ones. I'm sorry, I've only caught some of the meetings so far, but in my view, it's crucial to recognize that the knowledge that may come from thematic networks or from official sources is only a small part of the knowledge that farmers and advisors use. We need solutions that bring together all the knowledge and allow all to contribute, not just the knowledge that we are interested in sharing. I don't know if you have any comments for that, Laura.
Yeah, and I think that's again the point of thematic networks. They are networks, so it's important that those networks are, and actually we'll come to that, and maybe this is a good opportunity to move on to the next recommendations related to networking. It's important to recognise the relevant people that can contribute to that network, provide information and resources to the thematic network to share those resources. It's not just about what's created by the thematic network necessarily. They are aiming to bring together different solutions from different sources and share that. So in that way, this idea of having a centralized platform would, in theory, then be able to put different sources of knowledge all in one place. So that's the networking side of things. And I will just move on because I've only got a couple.
Actually, Maria Jose Amaral from the REA has asked to be allowed to reply. So okay. I have given her the microphone because I think she probably has some very professional input to give us. Thank you, Maria.
No, I just wanted to add, sorry, I cannot put my view. I just wanted to add something that I think in the discussion is being mixed, because you are providing recommendations to future thematic networks that they should consider these funding schemes when they are preparing the proposals, and therefore they are integrated since the start. And this is very much aligned with what we ask from thematic networks, that you involve the farmers from the start. And then there is another issue that when for the running thematic networks that have not sufficiently involved farmers from the start, they don't have them as partners in the consortium, then now you are facing the fact that you need to compensate for this presence. So is a way to solve a problem from the start, this compensation, because if the farmers are integrated, they are already partners. So this would be partially solved. Or if they are not partners, you could consider already at the proposal stage how you are going to have these people in. The fact now that you have to do amendments for 12 months, okay, I would doubt, or that it's just because of this. But yes, the flexibility is there in the instrument that allows for these certain things to be done. You just have to think of them since the beginning, and when you haven't thought, then you are at a later stage with an issue. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria Jose. And I agree with Laura. You have better finish up your presentation and then we can go on with the discussion in the end.
Back to this slide, and as I said, dissemination and networking activities are also key to reach and influence a wider audience. As previously mentioned, thematic networks serve different purposes for various groups. So different knowledge outputs, resource types, and information formats will be relevant to and appeal to different audiences. So those needs must also be considered. Networking is another aspect of the multi-actor approach to reach beyond the immediate vicinity of the thematic network and those involved in it. And it's key to engage trusted actors to share the knowledge further. So to support these activities, we recommend that funding agencies should develop and promote a range of standardized dissemination formats to appeal to different target groups. So beyond the concept of the EIP Agri Practice Abstract format, that's great, a good start, but as I said, different formats will appeal to different audiences. So developing this to include things like, and we do have standard things like lots of projects will do short videos of about 100 seconds to 2 minutes, but making that more standardized of video formats, presentation formats, training materials, so that we've got this basis of what can be used for different target audiences, a bit more structured guidance on that. And then finally, governments should facilitate and financially support mapping of local networks and the main information sources for farmers and foresters to benefit from long-term established networks. So as I said, thematic networks need to be able to know who to involve in their thematic network beyond the consortium partners, beyond that, to share their knowledge further, but also, as I said previously, projects are quite often starting from scratch. They don't have name recognition, therefore they don't have trust. Whereas if they reach out to, say, a national rural network or another long-established network that is trusted by users, then they can then harness that trust from that link with that network to have more impact and effect that way. So, and that's, we sort of started to touch on that on the discussion, and you'll be glad to hear that other than a summary, I'm now ready to open up the discussion a bit more, and I can see that we've got quite a bit of engagement. So Ilse.
Yes, I'll start with the final questions here, and then we'll go back to the discussion that I told you was going on a bit earlier.
Perfect.
Daniel says, we want one place to get information, but the information from the thematic network is part of the wider knowledge ecosystem. So we shouldn't necessarily design a knowledge source around the TNs, but make the TNs part of something bigger that can deal with knowledge from all sources.
Yes, can I reply to that, Ilse?
Please do, Lisa.
Because yes, I completely agree with you, Daniel, that is the plan, but it does initially come from somebody who pays. So I think the first step is to make a platform that serves the purpose of getting the knowledge created to thematic networks and multi-actor. And already we're looking at how could it become bigger, but it needs to start from somewhere.
Thank you. Sylvia comments that getting farmers in the consortium are a real challenge. And I think we all know that, so I'm not sure we need to comment further on that. Rosa says, what about the timing? Should the projects be longer than 3 years? We got some comments that they should be at least 5 years to get benefit from the community created within the thematic network framework.
Yeah, I think that could be a more specific point in part in the flexibility. Again, allowing a longer time period then allows the flexibility to work on that problem as it evolves, to build the network, to gather the information and have a longer period to make a concerted effort to share that information. 3 years is about long enough, or 2 years in the case of EURAKNOS was about long enough to collect information just about, and then suddenly you've got to try and squeeze in the dissemination side into your last few months of the project, which can be quite challenging. So
can I also respond to that? I think it's a yes and no. I don't think the the solution is to have longer projects, because in the end, the networks we need to find a way to make it networks that sustain, and just making it longer in terms of funding does not necessarily do that. And also knowledge evolves so quickly. I don't think that the solution is longer payment. It's more about how do we create these networks, how do we set them up, how they become independent from the funding. I think there's a need to search more with that. What support do we actually give to these networks, and how do we form them, and thinking around that.
Thank you, Lisa. And I would now like to go back to the discussion that started, and maybe you could go back through your presentation so we could get to the slide that has been talked about, because it started by Andrew noting, I'm surprised to note that farmers and foresters are only perceived to be users of knowledge, and I think the one before, and not providers as well. And there's a long discussion about advisors will be users, other actors of ACIS are users and providers as well, teachers, students, policy creators, and researchers. And someone says the list of knowledge users and providers seems to need a rethinking. And then there's something about the digital skills. You got back to that later. Peter at one point replied, as explained, there is a knowledge flow. Harvesting knowledge data from different actors becomes input in the thematic network. These knowledge data is translated to practices and becomes output of the thematic networks to be stored in the knowledge depository in a sustainable way. So I don't know if anybody wants to expand on that discussion.
Yeah, so yep, I will agree. This is a bit of a misleading diagram. So obviously, yes, but farmers and foresters, we want peer-to-peer exchange, so they are also providing knowledge. This was kind of a shorthand for me to look at all the different actors that we're trying to jumble up. And yes, there's a lot of crossover between particularly knowledge providers and knowledge users there. I kind of used it as shorthand of, the job description of an advisor would be to provide knowledge. The farmers might also share knowledge, but ultimately they're the ones implementing the knowledge. So that's a little bit misleading. So my apologies for that.
So we more or less agree with Luke Peters, who summarizes multi-actor approach in every step of the knowledge chain. Hardy asks about the platform. Should the platform feed into the media also in some way? For example, longer newspaper stories that time to time might be written would be appreciated to be a trusted source.
Yep, absolutely. Media is an important, that kind of comes into the networks and using trusted networks, the media as well, if it's a trusted source for any actors, whatever their target audience is. Absolutely, media is important to link up with.
And there's a comment about how about the adaptation of the knowledge provided to specific agroclimatic and socio-economic conditions.
Can I say, this is Alex from Athens.
Hi, Alex.
Please do.
Hi, I was wondering, first of all, we know that the majority of our farmers in the European Union, and especially in South Europe, are old. So they don't have the digital skills to be able to have easy access, at least, to a platform which one way or another will not be very, very simple. And the second one is, okay, you have a standard, let's say, piece of knowledge in the platform, but then if other farmers want to use this knowledge, they cannot transfer it as such to their own situation. So they need some intermediate mechanism to adapt this knowledge to their specific circumstances.
Thank you. Any comments on that?
Yep, I agree with that. And again, that's part of the beauty of the multi-actor approach. And by engaging these different networks and advisors, for example, there does need to be that face-to-face element of having someone as an intermediary to take these general recommendations and help farmers to work out if they are relevant to their farm in their context, and foresters as well, like how they can be used and harnessed within specific contexts is an important aspect. But that's not really something that thematic networks can do themselves necessarily. They can provide general information based on the experiences of various different actors and put it in one place, and then it almost needs another step to translate it back into a contextual form in some cases.
Peter here, reply from my side also on this question. So first of all, the older farmers, it's true, but it's not that we are not considering them. But we believe that they have a person in between, or they should have connection to the advisors, and the advisors will have the knowledge and the expertise to go directly on the platform. But this is something that we have considered, and we are still considering also in the other project we are working on, and that's Eureka, and they have looked at that. And then the other point regarding the practice, so that's in fact the need, or that's in fact the work that the thematic network is doing, translating into practice. So this information should be useful for end users and farmers. So that is in fact the job of the thematic network. So just a comment from my side, or an answer from my side.
Thank you. And in the meantime, there has been quite a lot more new comments. A lot of them agreeing with what Lisa said, that we can't just rely on the funding of thematic networks, but there's also some comments, and now I'm cutting them short because we're running out of time, saying that there are already existing networks such as the farmer unions, and there's a risk of making competing clubs, or what you could say that where should people go for the most relevant knowledge? And Suzanne says that the key players chart look reduced, so looking only at the funding of the EU net framework, and it's much too narrow. We must include and acknowledge the existing knowledge systems and providers. Jess, why don't you turn on your mic and say what you just wrote?
Well, just about the sustainability, I was just saying that one potential way to increase the sustainability of thematic networks is to upskill partners, including farmers, to provide the facilitation going forward so that the network could potentially continue post the funding life of the original project. I know of a few operational groups, for example, who are involved in the Hennovation project in the UK, which did manage to achieve this.
Thank you, Jess. And I think that we're already running out of time now, so maybe Peter, you want to end the meeting?
Thank you, Ilse, for giving me the final word of this session. I'm really grateful to, I must say, this morning session. So thank you, Laura, Lisa, Maxime, Jessica, for doing the nice presentations. Also, Ilse, thank you for doing the moderation. And in fact, I have to thank the whole consortium, because we know that the people in front are backed up with a lot of people in the back. So thank you to all. And thank you also for the people joining this session. And I was really glad to see the major discussion popping up in the chat. Thanks for joining us. Bye.